As we all know by now, the DCEU as we know it is just about done, thudding to an inauspicious conclusion with The Flash, which will serve as some sort of soft reset for a franchise that had a lot of potential and that will now never be truly fully realized. Sadly, the one who maybe had the most potential that fell flat was the big blue Boy Scout himself, the Man of Steel, Superman. With the 10-year anniversary of the release of Man of Steel approaching, and the Superman character being set to be rebooted, as well as the apparent return of my one-time coworker and drinking buddy, and generational acting talent Michael Shannon back as General Zod in the Flash movie, I thought that for my first video on this new channel, I'd take a look at what might have been the last time Superman was rebooted. Because what the original teaser trailers promised for Man of Steel was a new take on Superman that we hadn't ever seen before on screen. A Superman that exists in a world a little closer to our own, and a take on the character that I posited to be Superman the Reluctant God. And action. What's up, everybody? My name is Max Kinchin. I'm an occasional filmmaker and screenwriter, and far more often film talker about her. And this is a kitchen sink production. I spend a lot of time talking about movies and TV with my friends and family, my wife, my dog, and I figured why not give talking to YouTube about it a try as well. So that's what this is. Brand new channel, first video, and I'm looking forward to sharing some thoughts with y'all. As this is the first ever video on this channel, it would really mean a lot to me if you could give it a like and a subscribe. If you do, you get a lot more content. That's me talking about movies and writing and the filmmaking process based on my experience and the movies I like to see. And you'll also get some great footage of my dog, Doug, like you're seeing right here. He's a big cinephile dog, and he likes movies and talking about them, or hearing me talking about them, almost as much as I do. I just want to say going into this video that this is not a review of Man of Steel. This is not a value judgment of whether or not Man of Steel is a good movie, but rather it's thinking about the Man of Steel that we could have gotten, the version of Superman that's kind of suggested in those initial teaser trailers for the new Superman that we got back in 2012. These were very ethereal, very kind of majestic, legendary seeming footage played to that haunting Lord of the Rings track. And they suggested a new, different Superman that could exist in a more realistic world, kind of similar to Nolan's Batman movies. What I imagined from those trailers was a Superman that wanted to be human, and was kind of burdened almost by his gifts and the responsibilities kind of pushed upon him. I like to call this type of Superman, Superman the Reluctant God. Take yourself back to the year 2012. I've just graduated film school, the Mayans have us convinced the world is going to end in December, Barack Obama is on his way to winning a second term, and Christopher Nolan has just completed the massively successful Dark Knight trilogy, which, for many, was and remains the quintessential portrayal of the Dark Knight in live-action cinema. Nolan's trilogy effectively answered the question of what would a Batman look like in a more grounded, real world. And the darker, grittier feel stood in stark contrast to the brightly colored and quippy Avengers that had been released a few weeks prior. In the build-up to The Dark Knight Rises, there was also hype that Nolan was going to be producing a Superman reboot with a similarly grounded and gritty feel. In those first Man of Steel teasers, which were played before The Dark Knight Rises, aside from the washed-out lens flare Americana, one of the most prominent elements featured was from the producer of the Dark Knight trilogy and Nolan's company's Syncope logo. Nolan and his Dark Knight collaborator David S. Goyer even have screenwriting credits for this movie. This was going to be Nolan's take on Superman, cut from a similar cloth to the Dark Knight trilogy. It was going to be darker, realer, but even more than that, it was going to have gravitas. These teasers made it feel heavy. Zack Snyder, the filmmaker who had successfully made the anti-superhero movie Watchmen, was going to be helming this Superman. This was going to be something different than any big blue Boy Scout we'd ever seen on screen before. Later marketing footage would also show Superman taking down a drone and being picked up on facial recognition and surveillance cameras, which one would think would force the filmmakers to come up with a different answer to the Clark Kent question. It's been a given in just about all the comics and the previous movies that Superman putting on Clark's glasses and assuming his dumpier demeanor was enough to fool those around him into buying his alter ego. No way could an awkward beta boy like old Four Eyes Clark ever be Superman. You'd never consider it. Hell, you can't even imagine they could be in the same room together. But if Man of Steel was supposed to be a more real-world Superman, it's a world with drones and surveillance and facial recognition. Watching those trailers, I remember I wondered how could such a Clark Kent disguise ever hope to work in a world where that technology and government agencies like the FBI and the NSA existed. More importantly, though, in a world where Superman knows these things exist, why would Superman in this world even attempt to just put glasses on and slump his shoulders? Surprisingly, an answer to this hypothetical question came to me when I happened to watch Tarantino's Kill Bill a few weeks later. In part 2, Bill gives a monologue about Superman and the nature of one's identity. Hearing Bill's take gave me some insight into what I thought they might do with the secret identity question in this more realistic Superman movie. Talking to Uma Thurman's Beatrix Kiddo on the nature of her identity, Bill says, "Superman didn't become Superman. Superman was born Superman. When Superman wakes up in the morning, he's Superman. His alter ego is Clark Kent. His outfit with the big red S, that's the blanket he was wrapped in as a baby when the Kents found him. Those are his clothes. What Kent wears, the glasses, the business suit, that's the costume. That's the costume Superman wears to blend in with us." We've always taken it as a given that Superman never really makes a choice in becoming Superman. But what if we had a Superman who was raised as Clark Kent first, and then was faced with the choice of giving up the humanity he was raised with, or to cling to Clark Kent over Superman? Clark Kent is the costume that Superman wears to blend in with us. And why would he want to blend in with us? What if in this take, to be seen as human is what he ultimately strives for, and the closest he can get is to become humanity's savior? His invincibility and immense power isn't a gift if the normal corn-fed Kansas life he was raised to value is what he might want. In that case, what if he doesn't wear the glasses and publicly assume the identity of Clark Kent because he knows he's fooling anyone, but because he has publicly chosen to be Clark Kent and is essentially telling the world, "I have the power to save you, but in order to do so, you need to let me live a human life too." So, rather than it being a secret, it's a deal. It's a bargain he makes with the world. And that's not a portrayal of Superman we've ever really seen before, but it would have been one that would have made sense existing in a comic book movie universe that was adjacent to the Dark Knight's universe. In the eventually released movie, Kevin Costner's Jonathan Kent tells Clark that he should never ever use his powers in front of other people when he's a kid, even if that means not saving people that he could, because Jonathan Kent knows that Clark's presence as a Superman on Earth would have world-altering consequences when he was to be ultimately revealed. And yet, these are the words that he says to Clark in the teaser trailer and the voiceover. "You're not just anyone. One day, you're going to have to make a choice. You have to decide what kind of man you want to grow up to be. Whoever that man is, good character or bad, he's going to change the world." Now that seems like something you'd tell a kid you know is destined to become a ruler or a shining example to the mere mortals he'll one day fly over. But as a child growing into a young man, all Clark may want is to be a normal person like everyone else around him. In this telling of the Superman legend, his superpowers are actually kind of a burden and a risk with huge consequences should they be exposed. A Superman coming of age and becoming himself as he grapples with the responsibilities of his abilities against his desire to just be a normal person would have been unique in that, for maybe the first time in an on-screen portrayal, we would have seen a Superman that actually had to grapple with both internal and external conflicts. Because he's literally a Superman, such conflicts are rare and hard to write for Superman, which is why he can often feel flat and without a true arc on screen. And I saw this as an opportunity to give us a dynamic version of the character who truly would have had to grow and learn and make a hard choice in Man of Steel. So, the arrival of an immortal, all-powerful god, essentially, who wanted to be treated as anything but, was what I thought the main conflict of Man of Steel was going to be. And a decade later, I'm still a little disappointed it isn't what we ended up getting. So, to deal with that, I spent a good amount of time positing on what might have been if that theme had been explored more deeply. My hypothetical Man of Steel, as promised to us by these teasers, starts similarly to what we ended up getting. We see young Clark growing up burdened by his powers because his father, Jonathan, has made it clear that the existential threat they currently pose to a humanity that is not ready for them far outweighs any lives he could save in the short term. Clark would reluctantly accept this and agree to keep his abilities hidden as he grows up in Smallville during the first act of the movie. But everything would change when his father dies in a way that renders his powers useless, and this would shine a light on the reality that he is not just a corn-fed boy from Kansas, and that is what ultimately sets him on his journey to become the Superman he was always meant to be. The death of Jonathan Kent has always been a pivotal moment in just about every telling of Superman's origin, and Man of Steel's handling of it did end up being the worst version to date. Not only because Costner could have totally made it back to the overpass if he'd wanted to, or Clark didn't even need to use his powers to rescue him from where the car was. The biggest problem with Man of Steel's portrayal of Jonathan Kent's death is that it completely misunderstands what is supposed to be significant about the death of Clark's Earth father figure. Jonathan Kent's death is meant to prove to Clark that regardless of his immense power and immortality, human beings are fragile, and he can never hope to be able to save everyone, not even those closest to him. But despite that, he must continue on anyway. The Richard Donner Superman handles this concept the best by having Jonathan Kent die of a heart attack in Clark's arms. For all his strength and power, his father is dying because of something small and inside his body that Clark can do nothing about. It's actually even worse than that. Clark has X-ray vision. He can see the problem, and yet he can't do anything about it and is powerless to watch as the man who rescued and raised him dies because of a random medical abnormality. Jonathan Kent's death says to this version of Clark, what good are those powers and why bear the burden of them if he can't save the people he loves anyway? Worse than that, in this version, Jonathan Kent's random death that he was powerless to do anything about also proves to Clark that he is different from his parents and the humans that he is so desperate to feel one of. He had to watch his father die knowing that there was virtually no risk of him dying in any similar way. This completely shatters any illusion that he could hope to cling to that he's anything like his human peers, and that internal crisis is ultimately what leads him to leave Smallville and seek out the Fortress of Solitude, where he will eventually meet his Kryptonian father in the Jor-El holograms, who will teach him what it means to really be Superman. But in this version, he's also grappling with whether or not he wants to be Superman. He's been Clark Kent for the first 18 years of his life, and he's been taught up to this point that it's safer for him and for the world to remain so. The notions taught to him by Jonathan Kent could then conflict with Jor-El's teachings, and could provide some real internal conflict for him to grapple with as he learns about his true nature and what his biological father says he is supposed to be. The second Man of Steel teaser was released with a Jor-El monologue over it that reads, "You will give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards. They will race behind you, they will stumble, they will fall, but in time they will join you in the sun. In time, you will help them accomplish wonders." Jor-El sees Kal-El as something superior to the humans, an example for them to strive towards. That's a lot of pressure to put on someone who just wants to be a human being at that point in his life. Then, at about the halfway point of the movie, before Clark is ready, Zod would show up on Earth, having tracked Kal-El's Kryptonian ship after escaping the Phantom Zone. Suddenly, humanity is made all too aware that there are extraterrestrial beings out there who are essentially immortal. They can't be hurt with bullets, they can shoot lasers out of their eyes, and leap tall buildings in a single bound. So what does humanity do when it's scared? It fights back with all of its hate and its fear and its malice, and humanity loses badly to Zod in the first round. Now the cat's out of the bag, or Zod is out of the Phantom Zone, and Clark has seen the hate that humanity has for the Kryptonians, so he's forced to make a choice. Step in and save humanity, but in doing so, he'd have to risk never again being able to comfortably live as Clark Kent. Obviously, because we will see that he is still the inherently good and virtuous Superman we know, he would eventually choose to save the world. But now we would get to see that making that choice would also come with huge stakes for him personally. And as an acknowledgement of the weight and power of that choice, maybe that's when he's finally able to fly. And we get that really cool taking to the sky for the first time sequence we got in the original movie, which was by far my favorite part. Having the take to the sky scene come after making this choice, though, would make it so much more significant and honestly symbolic. He's made his choice. He's fully becoming Superman at the risk of his humanity. But he's doing it because Superman is who he really is. Now, after rounding this character corner, Superman would obviously step up to save the world and drive away, but likely not kill Zod. And once he did, he'd have to have a little sit down with humanity and say, listen, y'all, I see great things for you, and I think we can do great things together, but we need to set some terms. I know you all see me as your immortal savior now, but that's not actually who I am, and so please, for my sake, and more importantly for yours, do not deify me. You all see my real face, and you all know what I can do and where my loyalty is. But the truth is, I only want to be one of you. Maybe he can even have this conversation before taking down Zod once and for all. He reveals himself after Zod's first attack, the government thinks he's one of Zod's people, and Clark lets himself be taken into custody to explain himself in the situation. Kind of like what we actually got in the movie, but with some actual weight to it. He can then strike a deal and say, I will do this. I will remain to protect the vulnerable, but you need to respect that I choose to live my life as Clark Kent, with Superman as the alter ego. Of course, these glasses aren't going to fool anyone, and of course your surveillance drones will be able to pick me up when I step out of my crappy Metropolis studio apartment, but I don't want to be your god. I want to be one of you, not above you. That internal conflict in the third act could even be centered around that. The government first asks and then demands that Superman save them as the Zod threat grows, and Superman, not one for ultimatums, basically asks for that courtesy. The government, being the government, can't guarantee that for him, and so it's only when Superman then saves humanity in his virtuous truth, justice, and the American way, likely by not killing Zod, does the world then come to see his humanity as he carries out these super acts. We can even get the exact same ending sequence that we got in the eventual movie, with Clark showing up at the Daily Planet in the glasses, but the subtext now is, we're all playing along for the sake of humanity, and for the sake of Clark's humanity, who it turns out is actually a pretty decent guy himself, even when there's a tie over the big red and yellow S. Anyway, this was a lot of extrapolation from a 10-year-old 90-second teaser spot, but I so wish that some flavor of this was in the Superman that we got in the eventual DCEU instead of the ultimately bland, flat, and one-note version we wound up getting. Reluctant God Superman would have given us a more cinematically unique Supes that would have held up more of a mirror to discuss our modern world in the same way that the Dark Knight movies did for the 2000s. And let's be honest, in these times with Christian nationalism, religious extremism, and fascist notions on the rise, a Superman that a large portion of the population wants to rally around and deify, who says, no, don't do that, that is not what I want, may be just the type of Superman we need in this particular cultural climate. Reluctant God Superman, I think, also fits more nicely in a DCU that has Peacemaker and this version of the Suicide Squad in it. So hey, James Gunn, you're about to direct a Superman movie. How about putting a little Reluctant God Superman in there? Just a suggestion. Thank you so much for tuning in to this first ever Kitchen Sink production. I appreciate you watching all the way to the end of the inaugural video. Feel free to leave a comment below. Let me know your thoughts on my take. Is this just completely off base? Is it a lot worse than what we ended up getting? Also leave a comment. Let me know what kind of topics you might want me to cover on this channel. And if you haven't already, please do like this video and subscribe to my channel. It's the only way I'm going to get it off the ground. And Doug's got to eat. So thanks again, and I'll see you on the next one. Tail slating.